I haven't been camping since the night we heard the whistle. And after what happened in those woods, I don't think I ever will again. At the time, it was just me, Jake, and Liam. Just three mates looking for a cheap weekend away from work. Nothing unusual. Just a couple of tents, a campfire, and 2 nights in the middle of nowhere. At least, that's what we thought. We arrived late in the afternoon and spent the first few hours setting everything up. The campsite wasn't official, just a clearing we had found online that other campers had used before. Surrounded by thick woodland on every side. No roads, no houses, no phone signal. Exactly what we wanted. As the sun started to set, we got a fire going and settled in for the evening. We sat around talking rubbish for hours. Work, football, old stories we had all heard 100 times before. Everything felt normal, comfortable. Then sometime after dark, we heard the whistle. It came from somewhere deep in the trees. One long whistle, high-pitched, clear. We all stopped talking for a second. Jake laughed and said it was probably just another group of campers. That seemed reasonable enough. After all, we weren't the only people who used these woods. So we forgot about it and carried on with our night. A few hours later, everyone headed to bed. I don't know what time it was when I woke up, but I remember opening my eyes and instantly knowing something felt wrong. At first I couldn't hear anything, just the sound of the wind moving through the trees, and then I heard it. Footsteps. Slow footsteps outside the tent. Not running, not stumbling, just walking. I stayed completely still inside my sleeping bag, listening. The footsteps moved around the tent, slowly circling it, then they stopped. For maybe 10 seconds, then a shadow passed across the side of the tent. I whispered for Jake. There was no answer. The shadow disappeared, and the footsteps faded into the darkness. I didn't sleep much after that. The next morning I was relieved when everyone else finally woke up. At first nobody said anything. Then Jake looked over at me and asked, "Did one of you get up during the night?" I immediately said no. Liam said no too. Nobody laughed. Nobody joked. Because we all knew what that question meant. We'd all heard something. After breakfast, we decided to go for a walk through the woods. Partly because we were curious. Partly because nobody wanted to sit around thinking about the previous night. We followed a narrow trail. We'd never noticed it before. But the further we walked, the older the wood seemed to become. The trees grew thicker. The light seemed darker. Eventually we came across an old stone wall that was hidden beneath ivy and overgrowth. But beyond it was a graveyard. Not a modern one. A really old one. The gravestones were all crooked and leaning in strange angles. Many of them were weathered, and the names had completely disappeared and forgotten, like nobody had visited them for decades. Near the back of the graveyard stood a broken gravestone. Most of the inscription had been worn away by time. The stone itself had cracked down in the middle, making most of the writing impossible to read. I crouched down to brush some of the moss away with my hand. Only a few words were still visible. Whistle. Don't. Ands. The rest had disappeared completely beneath cracks and weathering. Jake asked what it said. I told him I couldn't make it out properly. Then we carried on walking. That evening we lit another fire. Nobody mentioned leaving. Nobody mentioned the graveyard. But the atmosphere felt different now. Quieter. Like we were all waiting for something. The sun disappeared. Darkness settled over the woods. And around midnight, the whistle returned. This time, it sounded closer. much closer. We all heard it. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. We just listened. A few minutes passed. Then it came again. Closer still. Not somewhere deep in the woods. Somewhere nearby. The fire eventually burned down, and we headed into our tents. But nobody slept. Every sound felt amplified. Every crack of a branch made my heart jump. Then sometime during the early hours of the morning, the whistle came again. Right outside the tent. Close enough that it felt impossible. One long whistle, was followed by silence, and then another. I remember holding my breath, waiting, listening, terrified that I'd hear footsteps again. But this time, nothing happened. The rest of the night passed in complete silence. At sunrise, we packed up immediately. Nobody argued. Nobody wanted breakfast. Nobody even mentioned the whistle. We just wanted to leave. Within half an hour, the tents were down, and most of our gear was already packed into the car. I was carrying the last bag when I noticed something. About 20 feet from where we had pitched our tents stood an old tree. It was massive, ancient. The kind that's probably been there longer than anyone can remember. And carved into the bark were words. Not fresh, not recent. The cuts were weathered and worn, like they had been there for years, maybe decades. I walked closer to read them. Then I felt my stomach drop, because the message said, "If you hear the whistle, don't answer." I stood there staring at it, trying to understand what it meant. Then I remembered the broken gravestone we'd found the day before. Whistle, don't, ans. The rest of the inscription had been missing. Suddenly it made sense. Jake shouted that they were ready to leave, so I got in the car. And we drove home. The journey was mostly silent. Jake had his headphones on. Liam stared out the window. And I kept replaying those sounds from the night before. The whistles, the footsteps, the shadow moving across the tent. The strange thing is, none of us answered the whistle. At least, I don't remember any of us answering the whistle.